Okay, Hamotzi, we're heading back into Hilchot. We started not last week, but the week before. I'm sorry about last week. Hilchot Hamotzi. We're dealing with. We finished. We didn't finish all the halachot until Yadayim, but we finished in the Tzurba Rabbanon the 4 shiurim, which for us expanded 7 shiurim on Hilchot Netilat Yadayim, and today we're going to continue in Hilchot of Hamotzi, the bracha of Hamotzi, how it's done, how it's said, and the halachot that are related to it. So let us start. This is something we saw already when we dealt with the last year. We saw Tosefot. You want to just turn back to source 4. This is on page 223 in volume 13 of the Tzurba Rabbanon, English edition. We have towards the end of that source, in source 4, Tosefot brought, there's a pasuk that says the words lechem min haaretz, right? Matzmiach chatzil v'hema ve'esev el avodat ha'adam lahotzi lechem min haaretz. And then he said, V'al kain yesh litzoa b'shtei yadav. Therefore, you should hold the bread with 2 hands, be'eser etzbaot, with your 10 fingers, neged yud tevot, corresponding to the 10 words shebemikra zeh, that is in this pasuk of lechem min haaretz. Tehillim 104, pasuk 14. So today we're going to pick up with the Tur. The Tur, another Rishon. The Tur, Chaim, says as follows. V'yitain shtei yadav al apat. You have to put your 2 hands when you're making the bracha. Sheyesh bahen yud etzbaot, because you have 10 fingers on your hands. Keneged, corresponding to what? Yud mitzvot hatuliot b'pat. The 10 mitzvot that are connected with making bread, right? First thing, right? You cannot do plowing with an ox and a donkey, right? So you can't plow the ground that you need for the wheat with an ox and a donkey. That's mitzvah number 1. Mitzvah number 2, you can't plant klayim. You can't plant mixed seeds. You have to keep everything kosher. Leket. If something fell, you have to leave it there. Shicha, forgot it, you have to leave it there. Heya, you have to leave a corner of the field. Bikurim, you got to take some of them up, some of the first ones up to the Mikdash. Truma, you got to give to the Kohen. Maaser Rishon, you have to give Maaser Rishon. You got to give Maaser Sheni. And you have Chala. So, V'lechach, therefore, Yesh Yud Tevot B'bracha Hamotzi. Therefore, there are 10 words in the bracha of Hamotzi. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. 10 words. Can I give these 10 mitzvot? And then he says further. The yud tevot b'pasuk matzmiach hatzil v'hema. The yud tevot b'pasuk ene kol elecha yisaberu. Right? Ene kol elecha yisaberu v'ata noten lehem et ochlam be'ito is also 10 words. That's why we have to hold it with our 10 fingers. V'yud tevot, and there's also 10 words. V'pasuk eretz chita usara, and I don't know the rest of the pasuk by heart, but if you want Devarim 8:8, and it has 10 words in the pasuk of eretz, the land of chita, of wheat, of saira, has 10 words. V'yud tevot, and also there are 10 words. V'pasuk v'yitei lecha, the bracha that Yitzchak gives. V'yitei lecha v'tal shemayim, right? That pasuk that we say, the minhag for many of us is to say at Havdalah, right after Havdalah, you see all the Siddur right after Havdalah. I don't want to sidetrack too much. We're dealing with Hamotzi, but I had someone once over to my house for Havdalah. So I have guests for over Shabbat, so they stay for Havdalah. And they're like, Moshe, your Havdalah is like 25 minutes. Yes, it is, because there's actually a lot to say before and after. Yeah, the bracha is Hamavda B'Kol Shecho, Priya and all that. That's the help. That's the brachas you have to say, but there are many yisodot, many special prayers, tefillot to say on Motzei Shabbat, right? You don't want, like we purposely want to keep Shabbat longer, right? You don't want Motzei Shabbat to come, you don't want Shabbat to leave, so it's good to say all these brachot. So V'yitei lecha is one of the brachot that we should be saying takef right after Havdalah. Okay, says the Shulchan Aruch, source number 10 on page 226. Ein levarach koidem. You shouldn't make the bracha before holding the bread. Okay? You'll see this sometimes. People like see something on the table of food, right? And they'll just say the bracha and then pick up and eat it. It's not the appropriate way. Now we're talking about bread, but all brachot really, you should be holding it in your hand before you say the bracha, but especially by bread. You recite the bracha before holding the bread. Yitain shtei yodav ala pat b'shah bracha. The Shulchan Aruch says you got to put two hands on it, and he says exactly what the Torah says. Yesh b'hen yud etzbaot. You have 10 fingers. Keneged yud mitzvot hatuliot b'pat. You have 10 mitzvahs that are part of making bread. V'chein yesh yud tevo berkat hamotzi v'yud tevo b'pasuk matzviachet tzir levhema v'yud tevo pasuk enikol lechiseberu v'yud tevo pasuk eretz chesayra v'yud tevo pasuk v'yitem lecha. It's exactly like the Torah. He brings all the reasons why you want to use your 10 fingers to hold the bread. Mishnah Brura says, before you make the bracha, you hold it. You only make the mitzvah right before you actually do it. When it's in your hand to make the mitzvah, right? And not beforehand. Right? That's why, for example, the tilat lulav, you're holding the lulav in your hand. Yeah, the etrog, you can't put it in your hand because everybody else is the mitzvah. You either put it on the table, you hold it backwards, whatever you do. But Mishnah Brura says, uvidi avad, but after the fact, im birech, the guy had the bread on the table, right? And he says, and he's not holding it, right? He's yotze b'di avad. Gam kain in tzarech lechazar v'lo'arech. He brings down, we already spoke about this before. So, the appropriate way to do it, you hold the bread in your hand. This is not only on Shabbat. This is also on a weekday. If you're ever making a bracha, whether it's a full loaf, half a loaf, one slice of bread, you should put your 10 fingers onto the bread, okay? And you make the bracha. If you didn't, you got to. You did the bracha. You're right. You're okay. Yeah. Yeah. You're saying in the words. And you have to say it in Alecha Mishnah as a Shabbat. So you can't wait till the slice comes to you. You have to say it when he's saying it. I hear. So, but the avad, you can do that, right? Because then you don't have to hold the bread with the avad. Because there are 10 mitzvot and there are 10 words in psukim. 10 mitzvot, source number 9, that come with baking bread, not to plow the ground with all those mitzvot, right? Okay. Says further Mishnah Brura, Yitain shtei yodav, Hainu de tov la'asot kain. Shabrua's lashon, the good thing to do. If he's wearing gloves, it's appropriate to take it off while reciting the bracha. So there is a discussion whether we can hold the bread while it's still in the bag. You'll see that sometimes right on Shabbat they sell the bags separate. What's it called? The challahs. So I'm scared to open it and it'll dry out. I want to keep it in the bag. Can I hold it in the bag?
One challah for my family is enough.
Right. But you're supposed to hold the bread in your hand. But it's in a bag. So it's a machloket. It's a discussion. The Shmirat Shabbat Hilchatab, and Shmuel Kamenetsky says, we can see from the Mishnah Brura that one should not hold the bag foil or plastic wrapping, because he said you have to take off your gloves when you're making it, right? What's the difference if you're wearing gloves if it's a bag over the challah? He does bring down that there are those who the Piskei Tshuvot, who says in the Bir Moshe, who say there might be reason to allow people to hold it in the plastic. I was instructed by my Rebbeim, by my father and others, that it should not be in any bag. You have to take it out of the bag. You have to hold the two breads together. Your 10 fingers should be on it. But there is the Piskei Tshuvot, the Bir Moshe, who seem to suggest some way that it should be okay, whether it's not a problem of chatzita or other issues, and it can leave it in a bag. But preferably, a Preferably, we should take it out of the bag and hold the bread physically with our 10 fingers. Then he brings over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, Kishi Amar Hashem Yigbiya Hakikar. Once you say Hashem's name, right? Shemar Hashem, when you say the name, Yigbiya Hakikar, you pick up the bread. Shabbat Shevarch Mashtayim Yigbiya Shtehem. And when on Shabbos you're using a bracha on two breads, you should pick up both when you say the Shem Hashem, when you say Hashem's name. Rochata Hashem, you should pick up the breads at that point. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. Interesting, I looked it up in the Yalkut Yosef to see if there is any, is this something we do? I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of people doing it. Maybe you've seen people doing that. But he does say over here, page 239, he brings as follows. Exactly this, the way the Mishnah Berurah says, when reciting Hashem's name in the blessing, one should lift the loaf of bread, and then he brings V'ladat ha'ari, and according to the Arizal, Yigbiya et hapat kishi amar tevat hamotzi. When you say the word hamotzi. So I don't know. Have you seen people doing either?
We do hamotzi.
Hamotzi, and you lift it up. Okay. Do you know you got either? Yeah, hamotzi picks it up. So it's Arizal. Okay. Maybe I just didn't see it. Maybe I just didn't pay attention. As people were getting ready to break it, they picked it up a little bit. Oh, the pronunciation. You would know if anyone. It would be you who would know. You're the Balkar. You're the Baldictor. Okay, so that's the Mishnah Berurah says pick it up as Shem Hashem. I don't know if it's exclusive. I don't know if you could do both, or it's one or the other. I'm not sure. I don't see what would be the problem doing it in both. But according to the Beasley, you lift it at Hamotzi, and others say you lift it when you say Shem Hashem. What about throwing bread? Sometimes you're sitting at a Uda, and there are a lot of people, and so he brings the Kaf HaChaim. So the Kaf HaChaim says as follows. Okay, I skipped a little. I got excited about throwing. All right, let's not get there yet. We're gonna get there soon. Kaf HaChaim says, okay, so Kaf HaChaim brings a little different of how we said to do it up until now. We said we should hold it with two hands immediately. Kaf HaChaim says, before one begins the bracha, he should place both his hands on the bread and begin to recite the bracha until the words Melech HaOlam, V'achasher Melech HaOlam yitpos hapas ben shtei yodav, v'yigmor habracha, v'achar kechifza. So he says, from what I'm understanding, Yeniach shtei yodav ala pat. Put your two hands onto the bread while it's still on the table. If I understand them correctly, begin to say the bracha. When you get to Melech HaOlam, then you're going to put the breads in between your two hands. Way too complicated. Let me get my hands right away onto the bread. I hear you. Right, but no, I don't think we're in it. But have you seen anybody knowing that way? I haven't seen anyone really be knowing that way, to put their hands down on the bread and then lift it up after saying Melech HaOlam. I haven't seen that. But that's the Kaf HaChaim. All right. Now we're going to go to our next issue. We're on page 228, dipping the bread in salt. Okay. One widespread custom is that when we eat bread, we dip it into salt. We have to understand the reason for this custom. We have to study the passage in Gemara Berachot. So let's start with the Gemara. Masechet Berachot Daf Mem, source 13. Amar Rav. Rav says, Tol Baruch, Eno Tzadich Levarech. Okay, so let's say this guy said the bracha, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And before eating the bread, he tells people, no, here, take this piece, take that piece. So he spoke, right? You're not allowed to speak between saying the bracha and doing the mitzvah, in this case, eating the bread. But you're allowed to speak stuff that are associated with the mitzvah. Right. No. Like, something associated with the, say I say the bracha, and I didn't do the mitzvah yet. If it's associated with the mitzvah, I'm allowed to speak. Right. So that's after Netilat Yadayim. But we're saying now, what about after Hamotzi Lechem and Haaretz? You're going to see that's also true by Hamotzi Lechem and Haaretz. But let's take a look. Tol Baruch, Eno Tzarech Levar. If he says take the bread, you don't have to say the bracha Hamotzi again. He says Habal Melech, bring the salt. Halba lepatan, bring the relish, right? Something to dip it into. Bring the baba ganush, let's say. Tzarech levarach. He has to make a hamotzi lachem again. That's one opinion. For Yochanan Mamar, Yochanan says if you have melech, even if he says bring the salt, bring the relish, bring the baba ganush. Nami ain't tzarech levarach. You don't have to make another bracha. Givil itari, tzarech levarach. If he says mix the food for the ox, then he has to make a bracha. Meaning, bringing salt is part of Hamotzi. It's part of Hamotzi. Rav Sheshes Amar Filu Gvila Torah Nami Ein Tzarech Lil Barach. Rabbi Yehuda Marav also Ad Mishiyachol Kam Yishitim Achol Lehem Mentah Shinemar Benatati Yasser Zechol V'Mitecha V'Darach Alta Sabato. Even if you say give it to your ox, you don't have to say the bracha again because you're supposed to feed your animals before you eat. Continues Amarav Bar Shmuel Mishum Reb Chia. Ein Abot Seir Rashai Litzoa Ad Shiviu Melech O Liptan Lifnei Kol Echa Ve'echad. Do not make the bracha of Hamotzi until you bring the salt in front of you. Rabba Bar Shmuel, Iklal Bei Reish Galuta, Ipikule Rifta, Uvatzala Hedja. They brought him the bread. Right? What happened over here by the Reish Galuta? Rabba Shmuel happened to come to the house. They brought him bread, and he immediately broke it. They said to him, "Whoa, don't you need the salt?" And he said to them, "This bread doesn't need. I'm really late. Din you don't have to wait for this bread." Okay, right. So first we have to start over here. So the Gemara said that saying bringing salt is part of the mitzvah. So far what we have is that you need salt as part of the bracha of Hamotzi. It's necessary. Then we have this story of the Reish Galuta who comes, makes a bracha, doesn't wait, doesn't bring it beforehand, doesn't wait for the salt, and says the bracha eats it, and he says this bread doesn't need it. So let's take a look first at Rashi, source 14. Let's take a look. Take it and recite a bracha. The one who broke the bread, before he tasted a piece, broke some of it and offered it to those with him. So he said, and then he said, before eating it, here, take. Even though speaking is a hefsek, like we see in the Gemara Menachot, the person speaks between the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, okay. But his speaking of taking the bread, it's something that's tzarech for the bracha, and it's not an interruption, and therefore he does not have to make another hamotzi. And even though he said take, he can still eat. If he said bring the salt, nami ain't tzarech levar. So he said hamotzi lechem and haaretz, and then he says bring the salt. Also not a problem. What's the reason? You want to eat good tasting bread. When you're making the bracha, you want to eat good bread. You're making a bracha on something good. You could. Technically, you could. If you don't have salt, you can use them that. There's going to be another Kabbalistic reason why you want salt, right? Brit Melech, we'll deal with that in a minute. But next, if the guy said give food to the cows, to the oxes, or he says mix the bran with the water for the ox, and he broke it immediately. The Reish Galuta broke it. He did not wait. This is fine bread and does not need relish. Pat nekia hizu, they ain't tzricha dipping into anything. So let's take a look now. Source 10 in the Shulchan Aruch. We're on page 230. The Shulchan Aruch is based on Tosefot and the Gemara that says that if you have bread that is salted enough, like our bread today, No one eats unsalted bread. If you eat salted bread, if you eat salted bread, you do not need to dip. You don't need. You need to wait until you bring them salt, a lifton, or a dip. So any dip, right? Shulchan Aruch says, I have to be wait for salt or a dip. Lilipat bo prusa habetzia, prusata habetzia, in order to dip the bread that you're going to bake. And if it's a nice bread, or and it's baked with spices, and it's baked with salt, like our bread, or if he intends to eat plain bread, that's a big thing there. He doesn't have to wait. So Shulchan Aruch says two things. Shulchan Aruch says if the bread is tasty, you don't need to have the salt. Or if you're planning to eat untasty bread, then you don't need the salt either. But he said, if you want to eat bread, plain. Let's now take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says, salt or relish. Why are we doing this? Why we need a salt or something to dip it in? The Baba Ganush. Why you need it? You're making a bracha. Hamotzi lachem in haaretz. You said Hashem's name. You want to enjoy Hashem's food. Eat it properly. Eat it with taste. Also, you want to bring it to the table right away, so you don't have to speak in between. Also lechatchila, because lechatchila it's forbidden. Even if you only pauses a short time, it is also proper to wait before reciting the bracha. Meaning,
I think the majority of people, when you keep the bread on salt, it becomes more disgusting. You can't eat the piece.
you're saying today it becomes less appetizing.
I never eat it.
You knock it off. You knock it off.
You don't like. I put a salad. I put whatever, but
The Shulchan Aruch himself says you want to eat plain bread, you don't need to put salt. Okay, let's see further. Masha Kotev Nikia could go and pat chitim v'chihi gavna. No, we said that Shulchan Aruch holds like the Tosafot. That's what we said. He didn't bring down the Tosafot. No, he brought it in from Rashi, and Rashi said the same thing that Tosafot said. But what did Tosafot say about the medical reasons?
Bread wasn't healthy. Bread was salt in those days, but these days our bread is healthy.
Okay.
That's the huge not for me. And a hanami, but it's surprising they didn't mention it. It's a huge not for me between the Mishnah Berurah and the Tosafot. That's
why you need the salt.
If this is a health reason, there's no Indian at all these days.
Right.
And maybe Kabbalah. That if you hold it safe, if it's still an Indian.
So now let's go to the Ramah. Well, the Ramah says, "Let me call Malcolm." You need to put salt on the table. He didn't say put the bread in the salt. He said put salt on the table. Right? The shulchan is similar to the mizbeach, as we know in Sefer Yecheskel. He starts talking about the mizbeach, and he ends off saying, "By the very lie, shulchan asher lifnei Hashem." The mizbeach turned to be a shulchan to tell us that our shulchan today can be mechaper for us like a mizbeach. So, the achila, and you're eating a carbon. You're eating as a carbon, right? But now, and now, if it's a mizbeach, your table's a mizbeach, and your food is a carbon. But never al kor karbanecha takriv melech, and all your carbons you got to put, and all your sacrifices you got to put salt. And now he says, "Oh no, it's a fire of a carbon." And then he says another idea. Then the Ramah brings another idea. See, all these Kabbalistic things are coming from the Ramah, right? But then he says, "Vehu megin mina porniot," and it also protects you from calamities, right? From troubles. And you would have to also do salt, maybe. Right. We also do honey or sugar. We put. Oh, you can't put. That's the Ben Ish Chai. That's the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai says don't use honey. He says use sugar. Yeah. It only says don't put honey on the Mizbeach. It doesn't say don't put sugar. Right? That's the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai says to do everything with sugar on Rosh Hashanah, not with honey. Yeah. What about the apple and the honey? The Ben Ish Chai says, he says to put it in salt for the same reason. It's the sugar, he says. Okay. It's going to mess up the song. It's not going to work out then. All right. Anyway. So the Ramah seems to be saying two reasons to have salt. Either because it's a Mizbeach, or it's because it protects you. Dumya Mizbeach, Moshe Amr Chazal, Mr. Brewer says, as much as Mishkayim Mizbeach Mechaper ala Adam, Achshav Shel Chano Shel Adam, now our table, Shenotanu Melachmo Le'adal, because we give poor people to eat from our bread, it's Mechaper. As it says by the Bear Lies, Shulchan Hashem Lefnei Hashem. V'ha'achila, Sha'adam Oicha. When is your food considered a carbon? Mr. Brewer says, Sha'adam Oicha lechazik k'chaysav, when he eats in order to get his strength, by day zeh, yebari v'chazak le'avodot Hashem. He gets strong, and now he can serve Hashem. Your eating is considered a carbon. Okay, so every time you eat, technically, it could be a carbon if you're eating with that idea of having power, koach, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this idea of salt protecting is already brought down in the Tosafot on Daf Mem there. And he says as follows, the Eita b'Midrash, this is very interesting. The Eita b'Midrash, Kashi Yisrael Yoshvin, when Yisrael is sitting, and they're waiting at Zeh, Achitlu Yudeim, Vehem beloy mitzvahs, Hasata mikatre galeim, Uvrit Melech Magin Aleihim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, based on the Midrash that's brought in Tosafot. You know why you need salt on the table? Because when everyone's washing their hands, they're all sitting quietly now. And when they're sitting quietly, there's no Torah to protect them. So if you don't have Torah to protect you, you put salt. The salt protects you. It's like, I don't got to learn Torah. I'll just put salt all around me, right? Some people, they do it for Spirat Omer, right? They put the salt and they walk around with the salt. Right? I'm good now. I got protection here. The salt is a protection. I think we have to understand why the salt is a protection. There's on Aish, if you have time later, you can go to aish.com and put salt, the covenant of salt, right? Brit Melech, covenant of salt. You'll see they bring down a lot of Perushim, what it means. For our understanding, and this is also why we have minhag by the Bukharians, is that when we do, now we're talking about Pesach, we have a minhag that when we do b'dikat hametz, we take salt and we put it into the box or whatever we're using to collect the hametz. This is brought from the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai says a lot of people do this. Is that we use a knife? We don't use the feather that they give or the spoon that they give. You don't have to get that package. That package is unnecessary for us. You're gonna get a knife, cord. You're gonna get something to put it into, and you're gonna go around and put salt in there first. And one of the reasons is because during the times you're doing b'dikat hametz, you can't talk and you can't learn Torah. So something has to protect you. So it's salt. Now, why does salt protect? Salt, we all know, is a preservative. It's used as preserving. In the olden days, they didn't have freezers. How do they preserve the meat? With a lot of salt. So when you learn a lot of Torah, and then you can't learn at a certain time, the salt tells you, oh, this guy is full of Torah. The salt is preserving him. Okay, this is already Kabbalistic. Again, suggests you at some time to go to h.com and look at the covenant of salt, and has a lot of interesting ideas about it, about Shesha Shemei Breshit, and about David HaMelech, and the like. Okay, so according to the Rama, one should have salt on the table for reasons he gave, even if the bread is already salty. He does not say you have to actually dip in it. The Mishnah Berurah, though, writes that you should dip in it 3 times. The custom is to dip in the salt 3 times. So you take the bread, 1, 2, 3, in the salt. That's what he says. I'm going to stop for a second to take a look in the Yalkut Joseph English edition on page 241, if you have it. And halacha, we're looking at halacha 16 and 17. According to the Arizal, one should dip bread into the salt regardless of what type of dough is made of it. He taught that this weakens the effect of the strict judgment and removes evil influences from the table. That using salt is a protector, it removes evil influences, and it doesn't matter what type of dough you have. According to the Kabbalah, one should dip the bread into the salt 3 times. 3 times. The word melech and lechem are the same letters, and is equal to the gematria of melech is 78. It is 78, which is 3 times 26. 3 times Hashem's name. Therefore, we dip it 3 times. Melech, Hashem's name. That's what he brings down from the Kaf Hayim. Then he says, on Rosh Hashanah, the custom is to dip into honey or sugar. They should have a sweet year. The correct procedure is to first dip the bread into salt and then into honey or sugar before eating it. Okay, so we always dip into salt. This is Api Kabbalah. Okay, the fact that we dip it into salt today is Api Kabbalah. Halachically speaking, you do not have to dip our bread today into salt. Okay, we don't have to because our bread is tasty and it's salt in it. It's spiced up. It's good. You don't need to dip it in halachically. Kabbalistically, we need to dip it in as a protector. Shem Hashem, a lot of good things that go in it. Okay, let's just see Piskei Teshuvot. He brings here. What do you do if no salt's available? Says the Piskei Teshuvot, quoting from the Kaf Hayim. V'im elo melech. Person doesn't have salt. Yachol la'asot beprusot hamotzi ke'en tibul gimel pa'amim b'chelik achir shel lechem. You don't have salt. You can take one piece of bread against another piece of bread and knock it 3 times. Dip it into another piece of bread 3 times. Bread to bread. You heard this? What's the Kaf Hayim? Get you on. B'chelik achir shel lechem. Ki lechem otiyot melech. Because the word lechem is the same letters as melech, as salt. Mem, lamed, ches, het, lamed, mem. Lechem, chelem, melech, same letters. Therefore, you can dip it into the bread instead. Uminhag ha'olam v'hadar melech l'tavel apat b'shar ma'achalim v'tavshilim sheyesh b'hem melech. You don't have salt, you can dip it into other things that have salt. You can dip it into your baba ganoush. Hey, baba ganoush has salt inside of it, or most of your dips or stuff you have on the bread on the table have salt inside of it, so you can dip it into there. But to dip it into sugar, eino nachon. Pia kavanot ve'ein bo inyan kalal. According to the Arizal, there's no reason to put it into sugar, and it has no effect at all. All right, it doesn't help. So that's why
even ketchup has salt.
Technically, you can dip it into ketchup. Yeah,
A lot of it's
right. And it's because it has a lot of sugar too. But the idea is if you don't have salt, you can dip it into anything that contains salt in it. Okay. Then Yalkut Joseph says, source 21 in the Tzurba, page 232. Lo yitchil levarech kodem she'itpos biyadav et halechem. Don't make the bracha until you hold the bread in your hand. The toshi ten base yadav, you 2 hands. Al hapat b'shashem mivarech b'nohagu l'tavel hapat b'melech. And our minhag is to dip it into salt. So today, why are we dipping it into salt? Minhag. We're doing a minhag, a pikabala. We're dipping it into salt. There is no halachic reason to dip it into salt anymore. Okay. Now, we're going to go into the next part. The next dinim for today is... unless you're eating matzah. Matzah has no salt. So matzah must be dipped into salt, unless do we dip matzah into salt on Seder nights?
Yeah,
we do. When we make the bracha, Hamotzi lechem in arch, we dip it into salt. We do.
Yes.
It doesn't stick to it though, does it? It's matzah, it falls right off. Okay, but matzah. What I want to say. Oh. the only way out for not dipping matzah, Shulchan Aruch said, if you want to dafka, eat it without matzah, without salt. Let's say I purposely want to eat matzah without salt, then you do not have to dip it into salt. Because matzah, the maisa, tastes good too, right? At least the first night, second night, it usually tastes good. Afterwards, then your stomach, if you're older, if you're in my age group, then all of a sudden your stomach gets a little bit harder to tolerate the matzos. Make sure you have the prune juice, part of your Pesach shopping list, okay? And prunes are prune juice, okay? Now, how do we cut bread or challah? Okay, let's take a look. The Gemara tells us a story. Sechet Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Bet Amud Bet. Rav Ashi Uki Yashloshim Melachim. Rav Ashi. What happened? Same as a regular day. Oh, we're gonna deal with that. We're gonna deal with that. Yeah, we're gonna see. Rav Ashi Uki Yashloshim Melachim. He's about to teach about 3 kings. So he said to his students, tomorrow we're going to learn about our colleagues, the 3 kings. Menashe, king of Yehuda, comes to him in a dream. Menashe says to him, you call us our friends and the friends of your father? How dare you think you're equal to us? Menashe says, I'll prove to you. Remember, Menashe was like a huge Russia for a large part of his life, right? He only did tshuva towards the end. Menashe says to him, I'll prove to you that I am greater than you guys. That you shouldn't call us friends. Where do you cut the bread after you say Hamotzi? That's what he asks Rav Ashi. And Rav Ashi says to him, I don't know. What? Rav Ashi says, I don't know. From where are you required to begin? So he says to him, hold on. You don't know this halacha and you're calling us friends? Menashe tells him. Right? Menashe, you think we're friends? You don't know this halacha. So Rashi said, teach me, and I'll say it in the drasha tomorrow. So Menashe Melech tells him in a dream, you cut from where the crust, mehecha dikarim bishula, from where it crusts as a result of baking. We'll have to see what this means. But first is one opinion. That's one opinion of Rashi. The first place where it starts to bake from. It's not like we hold. Shulchan doesn't hold that way, but we'll see that. You are right. Rashi said to him, hold on. You're such a tzaddik. You know a halachah that we don't know. So why did you serve about the Zara so much? So Menashe Melech says, Rav Ashi, if you were there, you would have taken and lifted the hem of your cloak, and you would run after me with such a passion to do avodah zarah. Meaning at that time, the Yetzer Hara for avodah zarah was very, very powerful. We have to understand, a lot of times we can look back and say, how could they do such a thing? How could that have happened? If you're not there in that time, in that circumstance, without Yetzer Hara, you can't understand it. The same way we're running after money, says Rabbi Yosef, the same day we're running after avodah zarah. Okay? Rashi now says, what does it mean when it says mehecha dikarim bishula, from where it crusts as a result of baking? What does this mean? So Rashi gives a few opinions. He says this is where the face, panea shelpat, the face of bread, the upper part, the edges of the bread or the bottom. That's what it means. That's the face. Shouldn't make the bracha in the middle of the bread. He says another is from where it first started to bake, which he says might be the exact same thing. And then he gives a third opinion where it's the best baked, where it's the best well baked. So Rashi has 3 opinions. Rashi's first opinion is the face of the bread, meaning where it's in the tanur, right? Panei shelpat b'tanur, which might be the bottom of the bread, right? You take the bread, let's say you take a lepioshka, right? They throw it on the side of the wall. So that's on the side of the wall of the tanur, that's considered the face. That's where you should cut it from the bottom. Then he says maybe it's where it first gets baked. Where will it get first baked? Where it's attached to the wall, right? That's where it gets baked first. What? Yeah, it's usually what we do. And the third opinion you cut from where it's the well baked, where it's perfectly made, the best part of the bread. Okay, that's the three opinions. The first two seem to be the same. The third opinion is you break it from where it's best baked. What does the Torah say? The Torah says, you break it in the most beautiful part of the bread. Making the bracha, cover the bracha, you're going to break it where it's most beautiful. Where it's most well baked. Okay, that's where you break it from. The Beit Yosef, source 25. He says the words of our teacher, the Torah, is the same as the last opinion of Rashi, the most well baked. This is the words of the Rambam. He cuts it from where it's cooked well. And in Masechet Derech Eretz it says to cut the bread not from the soft part, but from where it's well baked, the hard part. So you have Rashi, you have Rambam, you have the Torah, you have Masechet Derech Eretz. Everyone who says you break it from well baked. But then he brings from the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Smag, and he writes, no, he likes Rashi's first opinion. You break it where it first gets baked, the back of the bread. And he says, and this is the custom in France. This is what they do in France. But in Ashkenaz, in Germany, the custom is to cut from the top. For they say that this is the baked first. And the Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, he says, in order to fill both opinions, you should cut in a way that gets the top and the bottom. You should cut the slice that you get the top and the bottom. This way, your yotza, this machoket of where it gets baked first, from the top or from the bottom. And that's what they do in Ashkenaz, and in France they break from the bottom. It seems like in the Sfaradim, we break from where it's well baked. What does the Shulchan Aruch say? Shulchan Aruch says, Shulchan Aruch is Sephardi, right? You're going to break it from where it's baked the best. Ubipati done, yesh, and the Ramah writes, in our breads, which are loaves, with so b'tzad hapat, break it on the side, and break it from the top and the bottom, right? Meaning Ashkenaz. You want to get where it's baked first, which could be the top or the bottom. So you want to do it from both. You cut it at the edge so you get the top and the bottom. So it seems to be machloket, Sfardim and Ashkenazim, of how you break the bread. Do you bake it from the most well-baked part, or do you break it from where it's baked first? A beer halacha. This is the Mishnah Berurah and his beer halacha. You should know also that although the Ramah said his words without specifying, even though he doesn't say v'yesh, he just says about breaking from top and the bottom. It's as if he said v'yesh mishamar. He's arguing with the mechaber, because the Shulchan Aruch says you break it from the best baked, whereas the Ramah is saying you bake it from where it is baked first. The Mishnah Berurah brings some ideas over here.
After you say bracha, now you break it.
Yes.
But if I pre-cut, not all the way.
We'll deal with the cutting in a minute. That's the next section here, when to cut it. Question now is where to cut it. The next one is going to be when to cut it. But let's deal with where. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu la'achar okay. Hainu la'achar shenetah yadav la'achila v'roitz levarach al alechem la'achal u'b'tzei l'chol the makom shenetah heitiv. You should. The Shulchan Aruch says break it from where it's best baked. The hainu makom hakasha from the hardest part, v'lo makom harach b'memtziato, and not the soft part. Whereas the Ramah says you break it from the side to get the top and the bottom. But if one part of the loaf is burnt or covered, you don't use that spot. With a sliced loaf, he writes in the Mishnah Berurah, with a sliced loaf, I have a bread already, and it's already sliced. According to, and now I'm making another bracha on it. Okay, so this is the case. Here's my sliced bread, my loaf bread. I already cut a slice. So I have one side that's hard, and one side that's already soft over here. According to the Shulchan Aruch, where do you have to break it from? From the side that's still closed, because that's the best bake. That's the hardest part. According to the Ramav, Mishnah Berurah, the Ashkenazim, you just need the top and the bottom. So you can cut it from right here, because you get the top and the bottom. You don't need to break it from the side. Okay, so that's a difference. So for Ashkenazim, they can break their bread from the middle of the loaf, and they yotzeh because they need the top and the bottom. From us, we need the best baked side, the hardest part. So here in the Yalkut Yosef English edition, page 230. Is it 230? What did I? 233.
The guy said the brother, he doesn't like the burnt part. He likes salt without burnt.
I hear you. No, that's not what the Shulchan Aruch says.
That the best part.
I hear what you're saying. That's not the Shulchan Aruch says. According to the Maran, you have to slice it from where it's thoroughly baked. That's what the Yalkut Yosef says. Halacha Brua. Pizza and pita. Pizza and pita. Okay, so I'm sitting down to pizza. It's pizza's hamotzi, 2 slices, whatever you want to call it. However you get to hamotzi on pizza. That's right. You make the bracha hamotzi lechman aretz and you eat your pizza backwards. You start with the crust. After you say the bracha, you can cut a piece and eat the crust. Yeah, but it's funnier if you eat it backwards. Okay, but you have to eat the pizza. You make the bracha hamotzi. You eat it from the crust,
Not the cheesy part, right?
Say what?
Not the cheesy part.
Not the cheesy part, not because of the cheese, but you want the best baked, and that's the crust. It's the hardest. That's the part you say the bracha on. That's the part.
If it's not overcooked. Sometimes it's overcooked. So
if it's overcooked, then you can say it on the whole pizza. What about a pita? When a person is eating a pita, right? Pita breads. So he says
Shawarma.
you should, right? Shawarma, right? Lafa, same idea. When you cut it from the most brownest parts, because that's the hardest part. That's the most well baked. That's the part that you were breaking on. Here he brings a reason for this in the Yalkut Yosef English edition, page 233 and note 166. He brings from the Yarot Devash, the Rush 11, that says fire burns away evil influences from the dough. Right, like salt. Salt, by the way, is also considered somewhat fiery in halacha, right? It has like sharpness when it comes to kashrus as well. But fire burns away the evil influences. Before the sin of Adam Rishon, man's food did not need to be cooked. Now that the spirit of evil came into the food because of the sin, you have to cook it first in order to expel the influences of the Satan. Therefore, you want to say the bracha where there's less tumah and more kedusha, and that's at the well-baked place. So you're saying, I like the well-baked place, I like the softer place better, but he's saying the shot is that it's more kedusha in the harder part. So at my house, my wife likes the very crusty and hard bread. I like the soft bread. So she, more kedusha. She's eating the more kadosh pieces of bread. I should start eating it too. It just hurts my teeth sometimes when I eat very, very sach, very hard bread. It can hurt. Okay, see, I'm getting old again. Got to dip it into some water. Okay, but that's the halakha, Rabotay. That's the halakha over here. What about the Skate Shavot says all this applies to a large loaf of bread, but I'm eating a small challah, small piece of bread or sliced bread or matzah, the rule of where it's a slice does not apply. Therefore, in all the cases, he can hold the bread in 2 hands immediately after drying his hands, or after bracha, he can break the piece, dip it in salini. He does not need to use a knife even after the beracha. So he seems to be saying here, if it's a small loaf, you don't have to crack it. You don't have to break it at the right place. I didn't see anything in the Yalkut Yosef about a difference between a small loaf or a big loaf. Shulchan Aruch doesn't seem to make that difference either. So I would suggest to to always cut it from the place where it is well baked. Because I don't see anything here about smaller or bigger, but the Piskei Teshuvot, for those who follow the Piskei Teshuvot, don't need to crack it when it's a small challah. Okay. So far, so good. What time we have already? Okay, 7:22. When to cut the bread? Now our question is, when to cut the bread? So starts. The bracha must conclude with the breaking of the bread. You should end the bracha with the breaking. That's what Rechia says. Rava says, no, you finish the bracha and then you break it. Nahadra of the Rechia, Rabbanan of the Karava. I'm Ravina, I'm really aim. Ravina says, my mother told me, Avuch Avid Kerebi Chia. Darachia Tar Shetichla Bracha Imapat. Rabbanan of the Karava, the Hilchata, and the halacha is like Rava. The Amar, he says, Mevarach, make the bracha, v'achar kach botza. And then you're going to break it. And that's what we do. Not only do we do that, the halacha is you have to wait for everyone to answer amen. And then you break it. Amen is part of the bracha. So Hamotzi lechem in haaretz, don't start to break it. Everyone answers amen, and then you start to break it. Says the Rambam, Bala bayit, mevarach hamotzi, umashlam bracha. He finishes the bracha, v'achar kach botza, and then he breaks it. That's the halacha. That
and then he touch for everybody gets it, or he eats it right away.
According to us, he should eat it first himself. The leader of the group may not begin slicing or breaking the bread until the majority of the group finish saying amen, says the Yalkut Yosef. Amen is part of the bracha. Amen is part of the bracha. Next, what does he say here? Says here in the Yalkut Yosef, when you're saying the bracha, you're not allowed to do anything at all. Not even breaking the bread. Nothing. You don't break the bread until you finish the bracha. Continues the Tzurba over here. Talmid Ben Yonah want to say, and this is where it goes. So you were bringing up that first, it's preferable to partially cut the bread in a way that it's considered still connected, still a bread. You have to make the bracha on a full bread. That's the best way to make a bracha, on a full loaf. But you want to pre-cut it in order to eat it quicker. And then eat it. So recently at home, we try to go a little more healthier. So we, sourdough is a little more healthier than regular bread. But sourdough is much more crustier and it takes a longer time to cut. And when you cut it, it's crumbs everywhere, right? So I'm cutting it and it's like a long time between me cutting it in. That's fine. As long as no one's speaking and all that. But Talmid Ben Yonah is saying it takes too long. This bread, you can't use your hand sourdough. You have to cut it with the knife. It's one of those breads you have to cut it with the knife. So let's take a look at Talmid Ben Yonah, page 238. 238, source 32. First, you finish the bracha and then you crack it. Some people are worried about this. You don't want to cut it before the bracha. He says, you don't want to look like a hefsek saying the bracha and then waiting. So Ben Yonah says, take your loaf of bread, take the knife, and make slight cuts into where you're going to cut it after the bracha. It has to be connected that when you pick it up, it doesn't fall apart. All of it's connected in one.
Even on Shabbat?
Say again?
Even on Shabbat?
Oh, so we'll see about Shabbat. Shabbat might be different. For now, we're dealing with the weekday. You're right. Good point. So right now he says cut it slightly, and when you pick it up, it's still connected. Shulchan Aruch. Let's say Shulchan Aruch says, source 33. Once you cut the slice that he will break. And he needs to cut it slightly. When you pick up one side, the other side will come up with it. Because if it doesn't come up together, then it's considered as separate pieces. So you make slight cut. This way, it's still connected. Pick up one side, the other side connects. It doesn't fall apart. Mishnah Berurah says, the Medina Mevarach Achach Paris, a kikar. K'dei kol bracha efat shleima, shehu derech cover the bracha. You want to make the bracha on a full loaf. You don't want to cut it first. That's the cover to the bracha. K'dei shlo yeshiu rav bein a bracha lachil. You don't want a long time between a bracha and the food. The year second might look like an interruption. Katua poskim the time lechatchila sheyichtoch me'at bekikar kodem shemitchila bracha. So Mishnah Berurah just says it's in order to minimize the time. In order to minimize the time from making the bracha to eating the bread. Now, Malkiel said, what about Shabbat? Says the Toso in Masechet Brachot, Umihu, source 35, Umihu, b'Shabbat, Nachol lahachmer b'lavarach kodem sheyichtoch, shelo tishmet yado l'toa kol shetichlei bracha, shazi lo shelo yelo lechem mishnah. Tosfot says, when it comes to Shabbat, don't pre-cut it. Why not? Because you might cut too much, and then you're not going to have lechem mishnah, right? We don't have backup breads, right? Most of us don't have backup breads. You bought enough for Shabbat. We're going to do so much bread afterwards, so you don't want, so you buy enough. Now, when I start pre-cutting it on Shabbat, my knife might slip, and I might cut too much, and then it's going to be problematic. I'm not going to have a lechem mishnah, right? You need lechem mishnah on Shabbat, full loaves.
At the first half one, ready to give it out, but 2 hours.
I hear you, but you're supposed to make the bracha on the full one.
More than all 3.
Is the top one cut so much, or it's cut that you pick it up, it's still together? You have to even the one that's full when you make the bracha. If it's cut too much, it's not considered full anymore. It has to be full. Ramah brings this down. Shabbat lo yichtov. On Shabbat, don't cut it until after the bracha. This way you have a full loaf. If you did cut it, it's okay, no problem. If you pre-cut it, not too far. I pre-cut it like on the weekday. The Mishnah Berurah says the same is true on Yom Tov. Preferable not to cut it at all, even though you have to wait. During the week, we want to do it the best way, and we're not worried about lechem mishnah because you don't have lechem mishnah. It's okay. You don't need lechem mishnah. You don't need a full loaf on a weekday. And he says you're not going to. When he says not a problem if you cut it, it means it's not going to be any issues as long as the loaf, when you raise one side, the other side comes up with it. It's considered whole. Mishnah Berurah continues, source 38 on page 240. And he says, one should not cut the loaf until after bracha, so that both loaves will be whole. There are those who are accustomed to make a mark. So some people, what do they do on Shabbat? They don't do a pre-cut, but they do a scratch with a knife on the bread. So now they know where to cut. So it'll save a second or two. It's a little bit of so it's easier to cut a little bit after you made a little bit of a scratch on the top. All right, we Bukharis, if you're eating the Lefyoshka, who cuts it? You know, you break it with your hands, all 10 fingers, right? Like we said. It's like I'm kidding, it's also good. It's also proper. But if you're cutting it, like I said, the sourdough you can't do with your hands. You have to cut it. So.
You have to cut it. You cannot
So
work.
what I do is for the sourdough, I cut the first slice myself and I eat the edge, the first part, dip it in the salt, I eat it. And while I'm eating it, my wife quickly stands up and cuts the whole thing quickly. Apparently, women cut bread better than men. They're better with the knife. So she cuts it fast, and then I dip it into the salt and pass it to everyone. So while I'm eating it, she's cutting it quick. But that's the way it's done by me. Let's take a look at the Yalkut Yosef, Halacha 6. He says some posts can recommend simply marking the surface of the loaf on Shabbat, right? To scratch, so you'll know where to do it. Others say best not to scratch the loaf at all. In light of this, he gives a recommendation. It's best to use thin loaves for Hamotzi on Shabbat. This way, it's unnecessary to mark the loaves and be able to cut the bread quickly. Even on weekdays, this is the recommended to use thin loaves. So he seems to be recommending pita breads or something else that's easily cuttable, because you want to save on time. It's a recommendation. Again, if you wait between the bracha and the cutting, there is no hefsek. You're not speaking. It's not really a problem. You just want to reduce the time. So you want to do some cuts beforehand, or scratch or no scratch. And then, we try to do our best. Let's see if we can do one more sugya on Hamotzi. How to distribute the bread or chalas to others. Starts with the Rambam. The Rambam. The person who cracks the bread puts the bread in front of everyone. The other person takes it in his hand. The person who's breaking it does not give it into the hands of the other. Unless he is an avel, unless he is a mourner. This is a halacha brought in the Rambam. The Rambam says you do not pass bread into the hand. Passing bread into the hand is a derech avelut. You don't pass it. That's what the Rambam says. Says the Sefer Abdurraham. He says ve'efshar, another rishon. Shatam b'zeh. The reason, mishum shenemar, as it says, parasat tzion beyadea. The prusa is in the hand of in the Eicha. This is the Megillah's Eicha talking about destruction. It says that the bread is in the hand. And this is a remiss to the bread of Hamotzi, that putting bread into someone's hand, this is Averut. We don't do that. Unless he's an actual Avel. Says the Beit Yosef.
Does this apply on Shabbat? And
It applies all
Avel,
the
that's
time. It applies
7
all the
days,
time.
doing 7 days, it's
Oh,
Shabbat
to giving
now.
it, no. Because then it would be a public, remember, there's no Avilut in public.
So
no
there's
Avilut
few
in-
people on the table, family
So then
members.
you won't hand it into their hand, because you don't do any
Okay,
Avilut
very good.
in public on Shabbat.
So this Rambam is for the weekday, basically. When he says except Avelut, it's okay.
Right. Avilut, that would be on a weekday, right. Beit Yosef. Just like you said. So the Beit Yosef brings to Rabbeinu Menuach that in the name of the Gaonim, on Shabbat you give the Avelim the regular way, because there's no Avilut on Shabbat. So take a look at the Shulchan Aruch, source 42 on page 242. Habutzeya notem prusa lefnei kol echad. Va'echad notel prusa biyadot. Ve'ein habutzeya notem biyad ha'oichel el in kein hu avel. He doesn't put into someone's hand unless he is an avel, because of what the Abdurraham brought. Prusa tzion biyadeh in echa. Remez leprusot hamotzi shenotim biyado. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says, Habotzeya notain avalo. The Mishnah Berurah. Avalo yizroi. You don't throw the bread. Chatichot hamote al shulchan lefnei. This is where I'm getting. I jumped to this part already. Al shulchan lefnei orchim. You don't throw the bread to your guests. The guy's sitting all the way down there, and you're throwing the bread. You don't throw it. Even if it doesn't get ruined, it's a thick bread. It's not going to fall apart. It's nice. It's going to stay good. So, Aleph, have the design mitzvah. You're embarrassing the mitzvah by throwing it. Yalkut Yosef, English edition, will come out for the tour for a moment. Page 262. And he says, the leader must not throw the pieces of bread, even if there's no danger. The bracha was said in Hamotzi. It would be disrespectful to the blessing to throw this bread. You're not allowed to throw bread. I know Rav Ami said that some Moroccans do throw breads. And the Piskei Teshuvot gives a possible defense for this. Take a look at note 21 on page 242. He says, this is the accepted halacha for Ashkenazim, but Sephardim do have a practice of throwing pieces of bread. The Yalkut Joseph doesn't seem to recommend that practice of throwing pieces of bread. Nathaniel, you guys throw batemanim? You throw bread? Okay.
Buhars don't do that. The parents will
Right,
kill you.
Avram, we don't throw bread. Right, Avram? We don't throw.
No. Our parents will kill us if we do it.
Rami said that the Piskei Teshuvot brings a defense for those Sfaradim that throw pieces of bread. Ami said that by Moroccans they throw bread. So they throw an egg, they throw bread. Okay. Let's see. Now the Piskei Teshuvot. The Piskei Teshuvot, he wants to say about passing the hand-to-hand bread. He says, there's no Gemara that says that passing bread into someone's hand is a derech avelut. It's mourner's practice. It doesn't say in the Gemara, it doesn't say in the Medrash. Gama pasuk, even the pasuk that he brought, that Abdurraham brought, is only a remes. It doesn't say bread. It says parasha. It doesn't say bread. And the Rashba writes about this custom. He says this is from our Chachamim. For sure. It was known to me, and I forgot it now. If I'm going to remember it, I'll tell you where it is. That was the who was that? That was the Rashba. So no one has an actual source that you can't pass it hand to hand. And since there is no source, midrash, Gemara, that says you can't pass it into hand, El Mimosrei Chochmei Hadorot Betukvat HaRambam, rather it comes from the times of the Rambam, around his time and before him. And he says, therefore, there's no concern. People who have a minute to pass into the hand to hand, there's no problem with it because there's no makor for it. That's why you'll see Ashkenazim passing it from hand to hand, the bread. Right? We will go with the Rambam, Rashba, and everyone else. Abdurraham, who said we don't pass it into hand to hand, we don't do it. But they say they're right. There is no source in Chazal that says you can't do it. Oh, there's a Rambam though. Right? The Rambam says not to do it. But the source for it is not found in the Talmud. The Yalkut Yosef on page 261, page 261 of the Yalkut Yosef English edition, note 201. He says, as follows: since it's not found anywhere, it's not imperative to practice accordingly. But he writes then he writes, that's what they say. But then he writes, nowadays the common custom is to refrain from it. Because if the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, and everyone else who said it's either in Yerushalmi or it's in somewhere and it's here and it's there, and now we can't find it, is no biggie. Because we've lost parts of the Yerushalmi. We've lost parts of the Midrash. We don't have everything. There are a lot of times the Rishonim saying, the Yerushalmi it says this, so there it says that. We go and we look, and today what we have, it's not in there. So no biggie. Possibly this is what it said, and we don't have it today. But we're going to go with those Rishonim who said it was there, and therefore it's halacha v'maaseh. That's the way the Yalkut Yosef goes. and he says you can never pass it into the hand. That is not allowed. Okay, so what comes out is that you have to pass it onto the table and let them pick it out as well, pick it up, and there's no throwing of it either. Now, can we see if anyone's available? Milo Yosef, can you sit by us for a minute? Is anyone else who can sit by us? Like, I just want to fill up the seats. You want to sit here for a minute? Just want to take a quick picture of us learning the Tzurba. You want to just open the sparim? Stay on the line now, Malkiel, guys. Just want to take a picture of everything together. Chip for one picture. We have one more person who can sit here. I give you afterwards. Sit over here. Can we get Maloya said? Can we get someone to take a picture? Sure. And take it this way so we can get the iPad as well. They want to. They just want to advertise that there's a shirim going on around town of the Tzurba, the Tzurba group. So I just want to take a quick picture. So just take a quick, nice picture.
Whoever in the picture gets $100, whoever takes picture keeps $100.
Make sure you get the tablet here as well. You're looking in the box. Okay. Okay. Those all be on the same pages though. Don't be on separate pages. 243. Okay. So that was the machloket of the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim regarding passing bread into the hands. We have the Rambam, and the Duraham, and let's just make sure.
I know.
It's good. So Rambam says you can't pass it from hand to hand because that's derech avelut. The Duraham says a pasuk based on it. Others say it's based on a midrash. I'm saying Yerushalmi is not a midrash. It's not an Yerushalmi. The Piskei Teshuvot says if you have a minute to pass bread into a hand, it's okay because there's no chazal that says you can't. The Yaakov Yosef says that if the Rambam and all the other Rishonim said that there is a chazal, even though we can't find it, it was there, we lost it. Therefore, the halacha stands, and we don't pass bread into a hand, unless it's an avel. But if it's on Shabbat and there's Shabbat and there's other people there, there's no available before Hesi on Shabbat, so you have to put it down on the table. Get. Yeah, go ahead. I appreciate it. What? Is it? I'm not sure. It's Rosh תודה רבה לכולם.
Wait, Moshe,
Thank you.
question. Rabbi Moshe, question. To confirm, on regular days when we eat bread, Hamotzi, do we have to dip in salt?
Yes. According
Just like
to
Shabbat?
Yes. According to us, Kabbalistically, yes. Halachically, you don't need to because our bread is good.
Our minhag is to do
our
it or
minhag
not
is
to do
to all the time. Shabbat, Yom Tov, weekday, always dip it in 3 times.
Okay, thank you.
תודה רבה.
חזק.
חזק ומעשה כולם.
There was